You're listening to Idaho Matters. I'm Gemma Gaudette. One Idaho military veteran who saw combat in Afghanistan is on a mission to bring U.S. troops home from the ongoing war zones in the Middle East. And he's got what some might say unlikely allies, student groups at Boise State University. Joining me live in studio to talk more about this mission, as well as the Bring Our Troops Home U.S. program, are military veteran Dan McKnight, Bryce Robinson, president of Boise State University Student Republicans, and Joe Goody, president of Boise State University's Young Democrats. Welcome to the program, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Dan, I want to start with you. You started the Bring Our Troops Home program in January. Tell me why you decided to do this.
Sure. On January 3rd, Idaho Senator Jim Risch was confirmed as the new chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, and I saw an opportunity for someone in Idaho to have leverage over foreign policy, and the topic of troop and veteran causes was really near and dear to my heart, and so I figured I would write a letter to the editor and see what happened, and we started getting some traction, and we went from there.
So talk to me about what it is like to be in the Middle East. I mean, this war has been going on for upwards of 17 years, longer than either of my children have been alive, just to put it into perspective. I mean, I look at the two of you, Joe and Bryce. I mean, you don't know life probably without us being in the Middle East.
Exactly.
What is it like for troops that are over there, and why is it so important that they come home?
Sure. We've been there for 17 years and 8 months in Afghanistan. Life in the Middle East is not like it is here. They don't hold things important like we do. Their quality of life is different than ours. What is important to us, our freedom of speech and religion, our democracy, the form of government that we use, is not important to them. In Afghanistan, their important things are surviving, goat herding, finding the next meal, fuel for cooking. And so it's hard for us to spread our lifestyle to an area that simply doesn't want it. And we're there trying to do a mission of nation building and supporting a fledgling government that has some corruption in it. And it's just not taking hold because it's not important to them.
And when you wrote this letter to the editor, and as you said, got traction, Bryce and Dan, is that kind of how you two heard about this? How all of a sudden did these two unlikely opposing political groups come together for one cause?
So Dan actually reached out to me about 2 months ago when he was putting on a panel at the Boise Library with himself, Representative Tammy Nichols from Nampa, and a few other members of the community as well as myself, when we actually wanted to go out and spread this positive message of bringing the troops home. Mm-hmm. Like you stated, we've been in this war for 17 years. There are some people who are currently serving in Afghanistan today who were not born when the conflict first took off in 2001. And so when you put that in perspective and you begin to realize how long we've been here and what we've really been able to accomplish and what we plan on accomplishing moving forward, it just seems like it's time to really reconsider what our end goal is in Afghanistan and Iraq and a lot of the other foreign interventions that the United States has been a part of, and to bring the troops home.
And Joe?
Yeah, I first met Dan. Bryce and I have a radio show on campus called Crossing the Aisle. So we may come from different sides of the ideological spectrum, but we also try to have both of our communities find some commonalities. Mm-hmm. And so I really appreciate the relationship that our two clubs have formed. And so I met Dan from that radio show, and Dan was just so upfront with asking, how can I help your club? How can we help build this community? And, another thing is that we went in after 9/11 with the intent to kill Osama bin Laden and everyone who was involved in aiding the 9/11 terrorist attack. And Osama bin Laden is dead. Everyone who aided in the 9/11 terrorist attack is dead. And so, like Dan said, we've been in these countries trying to nation build, the United States has a history of always wanting to be the world police. And now we're in there trying to solve other countries' problems, try to impose our culture and our values into a country who simply may not really appreciate or value them, which creates even more animosity.
I'm speaking with military veteran Dan McKnight, Bryce Robinson, president of Boise State University Student Republicans, and Joe Goody, president of Boise State University's Young Democrats. We're talking about bringing our troops home. And Dan, when this got traction, you decided to basically draft a resolution, correct?
We did. I first went to a Boise Chamber of Commerce event where Senator Risch was speaking, and I questioned him publicly in front of the luncheon ask him what circumstances need to be met in order for him to truly support it. And he said right there in Boise, I support bringing the troops home. I'm done with nation building. And then he went back to Washington and voted just the opposite 3 times in 90 days to keep our troops in Afghanistan and Yemen and Syria. So I met with Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeehan and Tammy Nichols, and we talked about putting this resolution in front of the legislature this year, but it was too late in the session. And so we're working for next year. And the resolution basically says that we want our delegation in Washington, D.C. to recognize that the authorization to commit troops to war lays in the hands of the House of Representatives, and that we want to encourage our leaders, Senator Risch and Senator Crapo, Representative Fulcher and Simpson, to advocate for an end of war and to wrestle back that control from the executive branch. And going forward, if we need to go to war, let's have a debate about it and let's do it the right way.
Have you heard from any of our representatives on Capitol Hill since this resolution?
Yep, Senator Risch actually commented in the Statesman 2 days ago, saying that he supports the movement, he appreciates the advocacy and where we're going. He supports finding an end of war in a responsible and thoughtful manner. Now we're just got to come to terms on where we can agree on how to do that. Congressman Fulcher's office called yesterday to say that they support what we're doing and to invite us in for a meeting next time he's in town. And so we're going to take them up on that. And then we're working with some bipartisan members of the state legislature, both Democrats and Republicans, to co-sponsor that resolution. And
is this part of it with all of you, is that there are some issues that just need to be bipartisan?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a Republican or a Democratic issue. I think this is an American issue. I mean, we've been in war for about 17 years now, almost 18 if you look at the dates. And this is actually a really conservative issue as well. I mean, I've talked to people in the community who say, well, you're trying to take executive power away from the president, but no, that's not what we're going for. The War Powers Resolution that was passed in 1972 allows the president to commit troops to foreign intervention for a 60-day combat period and then a 30-day withdrawal period. So we're not taking away any power. Our goal is not to take away executive power from the president in his ability to protect the United States from foreign or domestic threats. We just want to say if it goes past that, if it exceeds that 30 or that 90-day limit, go through Congress, let's put it to a vote, and let's go through what the Constitution lays out, the constitutional process.
And I know, Dan, you have mentioned that, a lot of things that are going on in the Middle East now with our troops, they're building things like roads, like schools, but yet we still have military members who are losing their lives. In fact, just the other day, a service member from Horseshoe Bend lost his life in a non-combat accident. When you read things like that, what comes up in you?
Price could probably answer this. He saw it last night when the news hit. I was with Price having dinner after our meeting last night. He was in his car, I was in mine, and I saw it on my phone. And I got out of my car, left it running, left the doors open, and came over to his car, and I said, look, this is why we're doing what we're doing. And the fact that it's from Horseshoe Bend, he's a 20-year-old kid.
So he doesn't even remember. He didn't even remember life before.
Doesn't know what life was like. And like Joe said, there's going to be someone that's going to die this year or maybe next year, and we're going to hear about it in the media, that died in Afghanistan or Yemen or Iraq or Syria, that wasn't even born when 9/11 happened. He's going to die in a war that he wasn't even part of. He wasn't alive. He had no stake in it. And all the college students that were at the meeting last night, they don't know a moment in their lives when America wasn't at war. And that's not who we are. Great nations don't stay in endless wars. President Trump said that in his State of the Union address.
Joe?
Sorry, I was just going to say, my members don't even remember 9/11. And
right.
So, like Price was talking about, this is an American issue. I truly see it as a humanitarian issue. All the, people we're sending over and all the innocent lives that are being lost, it's awful.
And you had a gathering on campus last night for student groups. But before we talk about that, Price, I want to know your reaction to what Dan talked about when the news came over about the service member from Horseshoe Bend.
Well, it was humbling. I mean, we were in the car. We were about ready to go. I saw Dan get out of his car and walk over, and you could just see the look on his face. I mean, he was heartbroken. And when he showed us what had happened, and I come from a military community bound here. I'm from San Diego originally, which is just...
It's a military town.
It's a military town. We have Air Force, Marines, Army, Navy. I mean, I grew up with people who were members of the military community as being my friends' parents, blah, blah, blah. But So we know I know personally the kinds of effects that these wars have had on families, on individuals, on parents, on children. It in some cases can rip families apart, and in situations like the one that happened last night, it can rip families apart permanently. Mm-hmm. So it really is humbling to see, and it really makes me more steadfast in our goal of promoting this message of bringing troops home and ending these needless wars, because we don't want to have more American soldiers coming home and facing these kinds of mental challenges, mental and physical challenges once they get back to the home front.
I think another important part was I never really had an opinion on this topic until I met Dan, and that's probably because I never really saw this issue be talked about in the airwaves as much. So I think a lot of what our meeting was, the purpose of our meeting was for last night, and a lot of the purpose of this organization is to make our government more transparent and get people to realize and educate people on what is truly going on, letting people know. Look at how many innocent lives are being lost. Look at how many countless trillions of dollars are being lost fighting these endless wars. And so that's a lot of what this campaign's trying to do, is let people know what's going on.
And go ahead, Dan.
So that's a great point. We our military is a volunteer military, and so typically, I don't know the numbers on this, but probably 90% or greater come from middle class or lower economic class members of our society. And so our populace has become very apathetic to what happens to our military overseas. The populace really doesn't give much thought to what happens in their name by our military overseas. And I think that's why we're having a hard time getting national attention, getting a real aggressive movement to bring the troops home.
But do you also think, too, it has to do with it's gone on for so long that it has become a part
of life.
It's just part of life. Exactly. So, Dan, what happens next? But also, since you have heard from Senator Risch, from Congressman Fulcher, does that give you hope? Does that encourage you? What happens next in this process?
Well, the next step is we're going to continue what we're doing here in Idaho. Idaho, I want to make Idaho that chapter in history that's looked on as the catalyst for ending the wars. But the fight can't stop here. So we've got support in Wyoming now. There's a Republican representative, Tyler Lindholm, who's supporting the cause in Wyoming now and taking up the same actions in Wyoming that we're doing here. We're working with a representative in Montana. And this summer, Price and I are going to Washington, D.C., and we're going to, I guess, do an old-style Army raid, and we're going to kick in some doors, and we're going to...
You're going to meet with all of our representatives?
We're going to ask every representative and senator that we can get time with, not just Idaho's, but anybody that will take us in a meeting, and we're going to have them sign a pledge advocating for the end of war.
Not to mention, we're also going to be, I'm personally, when I go back to California, building coalitions down there with veterans communities, because it is such a hot spot for veterans in the United States, going out, meeting with veterans, and building coalitions of support in order to get behind this movement and turn it into something that's not just an Idaho movement, but a nationwide movement.
And how do people get involved with the Bring Our Troops Home program, Dan?
There's a couple ways. First, I would encourage them to go to bringourtroopshome.us, sign the petition, and that'll put their email address sent to me, and then it'll sign a petition that'll be presented to Senator Risch here very soon. We ask them to share our page on social media, tell their friends about our message, write a letter to their senator and congressman, guest opinions, letters to the editor. Let your voice be heard. If you're tired of war and you want to see an end to these wars, say something, join us.
And we should note, we did not have a chance to reach out to Senator Risch's office. We will do that in order to hopefully let him have a response to this as well. But I want to thank all three of you for coming in, for bringing this to the airwaves, for talking about it. I think it is something that, again, if we don't talk about it, we don't know about it. So thank you all very much. My guests today have been military veteran Dan McKnight, Price Robinson, president of Boise State University Student Republicans, and Joe Goody, president of Boise State University's Young Democrats. Again, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Up next, high-tech advances in treating sports injuries. I'm Gemma Gaudet. You're listening to Idaho Matters.